Okay. People are still joining. Sorry. Okay, so before we start, I would like to tell you that we're recording this session, so you just know about that. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Kazakhstan American Corners program. My name is Selfia and I'm the coordinator of American Corner Karganda, and also I'm the host of this meeting. And so today's session is about the understanding US elections. And I'm happy to introduce you to Abigail Homer, who is a Fulbright English Teaching Assistant program alumna in Kazakhstan. And Abigail was a Fulbright ETA in Aktau, Kazakhstan last year and this year as well. So again, I should tell you that we are recording this session, and also this session should be interactive. So please use the chat box to ask your questions, and also try to ask some questions to Abby. So you may use your mics to just turn it and ask some questions, okay? And I guess that's all from me. And now I'll give the floor to Abby. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you, Alfia. Like Alfia said, feel free to ask questions, especially if there's something you don't understand. There will be some set times for questions and answers, but you can always write in the chat, even if it's not question and answer time. So feel free with your questions. Otherwise, I'm excited about this topic because I think the most helpful thing is to give information that will help people understand the news about elections, especially when results are coming in next week, so that everyone will understand what these results mean. There's a lot of information, so we might not get to everything, but I'll give what I can. So I will share my presentation. One moment. Okay. Okay. So I have 3 topics. Again, we probably won't get to everything, but the order I think is the most important for understanding the US elections and the news you might see about the elections this year. Okay. So first, I wanted to explain some quick vocabulary. Some of these are very easy words, like election. I think you all know election, or you would not have joined our meeting. So we have different kinds of elections: primary elections and general elections. Primaries are when people choose who the finalists will be, basically. Each party will have their nominees for the general elections. So these already happened. They usually happen in spring. And now we have a general election. Voters, these are the people who participate in the election. They come to give their vote. Ballot is a very important word that a lot of people don't know, which is the piece of paper that you write your vote on. So it's a piece of paper that looks like a test or a quiz. It has multiple choice answers, and we use this to cast our vote or give our vote. There's polling place. That's where people go to vote. We can also say the polls. So people will go to their polling place, polling location. And again, these might be words that you see in the news if you follow news about the election. Exit polls, these are things that people pay a lot of attention to. on election day, because they're not the official votes, but when people are voting, sometimes they will tell people, like a survey, who they voted for. So when they give this information to the media can guess who will win faster than the votes are counted. So we call them exit polls. So the news might say exit polls predict that a certain person will win. It's not official, but it's a guess. And it's usually pretty accurate. And then we use the word race to talk about elections where there are candidates. So presidential race, gubernatorial race is for governors, and etc. Senatorial is for senators. But this time we have a lot of different races happening. One is a presidential race. Candidate or nominee are for the people who are in the elections. Candidate, it's close to like Russian, so I think it's easy to understand. Swing state is something we will talk about more, but in US elections, one of the things that is confusing or complicated is that people pay a lot of attention to each state instead of just the popular vote for the whole country. So a swing state is a state where the majority of people don't prefer one party or the other party. So they can be unpredictable. We don't know which party they will vote for. And the Senate and House of Representatives are our people in Congress. So we have two chambers of Congress, is what we call it. One is the Senate, which every state has 2 senators. And the House of Representatives has many more people in it because it's determined by population of the state. So a state might have 1 representative in the House, or they can have 50. It depends on the population. And these will be important for understanding the system of the US, which is what I will start with. So first I have a question. So I hope you can write it in the chat, your answer, or you can just use your mic if you would prefer. But have you ever seen a map like this? And do you know what the colors and numbers mean? Let's see.
Okay, Abby, there is a comment that somebody, I will share here answered many times.
One moment. Sorry, I don't see the comment box. I need to close my presentation.
Abby, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, okay, don't worry about this. I will just read the questions, the answers for you.
Okay.
Okay, so as I said before, Alisher, he answered yes many times. So he has seen a map, and also there are electoral votes for each state. So the Nat answered yes. And also there are the colors of states. Colors mean the parties of votes. Maybe states.
Yeah.
Okay, wait.
So that's exactly correct. So somebody said that the colors are for the parties. So that means the majority of people in that state voted for one specific party. I'm not sure if you know which party is which, but blue is for the Democratic Party, almost always, and red is for the Republican Party. So we use words like red state and blue state to talk about states that always vote for a specific party. So you can kind of see the states with a lot of the biggest cities in the US tend to be blue states, and cities with rural populations where people live in the country tend to be red states. So you can't tell always because there are states that switch, but we can see this. So this map shows the results for the Electoral College, which is what I will describe. So the Electoral College is our system in the US, and unfortunately, even a lot of Americans don't understand it perfectly. It has a reputation for being confusing. So hopefully this will help you to understand it better than most Americans, because again, a lot of Americans also don't understand. So unlike most countries, the US presidential elections are not decided by popular vote. So when you read the results of an election, it doesn't just show what percentage of people voted for, let's say, George Bush and what percentage voted for Mitt Romney. This is an old election. It will talk about states, how many states they won, and how many electoral college votes they received, which is not necessarily the same as the popular vote. So the Electoral College is actually a group of people from each state and Washington, D.C., the capital city, and they're chosen to select the president and the vice president. So the people don't actually choose the president. When we get our ballots, the paper, we see the names of the candidates. So we see these bubbles we can fill, and we will see names like Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and we can choose that way. But what we're actually choosing is not them, we choose electors. So there are electors for each party, and if we choose Hillary Clinton, then we're choosing electors for Democrats. If we choose Donald Trump, then we're choosing electors for Republicans. And then those electors usually vote for the candidate from their party, but they are free to choose whoever they want. So it's a little bit of a different system, and it can be different from popular vote, and sometimes it is, and I'll talk about that. Okay, so the people who wrote the Constitution designed this system on purpose because they expected the electors to use their own judgment, so they could decide if people are incorrect when they're voting, they can decide to choose someone else. But this is very rare, and in modern history, this does not happen. People in America expect the electors will choose the candidate they voted for. And it would be a big scandal if they didn't. So it just shows how the system has changed over time and how people's understanding changed. So these political parties, of course, are very powerful, but they usually choose what the people voted for in each state. So I have another map here that we also see sometimes. This shows the map of the US, but it's according to the Electoral College, which states are bigger. It's by population, by how many electoral votes they have. And this is an old map from 2012. from our election then. So these are how results are shown sometimes. So you can see who got more Electoral College votes. So how many electoral votes does each state have? Because it's not equal. So each state has the same amount of electors as representatives in Congress. So every state has 2 senators and they have at least 1 representative in the House. So I said before, the House is our chamber of Congress that is determined by population. So this can be different, but it means every state has at least 3 electoral votes. They have 3 electors, but some have more. So you can see California has the biggest population, so they have 55 votes. And then states like Montana, where I live, has only 3. Or Alaska, the biggest state, has only 3 because it's determined by population. And because it's by population, this can change. So every 10 years we have a census, and it can change the amount of representatives. And if that happens, it changes the amount of electors. But like I said, every state has at least 3. And of course, if we get a new state, then there will be new electors too. So how do you know who wins? How many electors or electoral votes do you need to win the election? So as I said, this number of electors can change depending on population or how many states there are. Right now, there are 538. So the number that the news talks about a lot is 270. Whoever wins should have at least 270 votes. So this also means that even before results are all counted, when we're still counting the results or processing the results, if one candidate reaches 270 votes, they can announce that they won, and the news might announce who won the election. Even if not all votes are counted, they know if you get to 270, then you win. So again, this can change. Next election, it might be a different number, but for a while now, it's been 270. But we'll see if the population changes or something. So the population, the elections are determined by each state. They're all different. So the news watches people by their state. It watches each state separately. And the reason for this is that we have a winner-take-all system in most states. Not every single state, but most of them. So what winner-take-all means is that if a majority of people vote for one candidate, even if it's a small majority, like 51% vote for Donald Trump and 49% vote for Joe Biden. So it's only a small 2 percentage points, right? Even in this case, Donald Trump would win all of the electors and electoral votes for that state. So winner takes all of the electoral votes. So because of this, I can show you the chart on this right-hand side. So these are results from 2008. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the graph on the right suggests about the system? How do you think this winner-take-all system influences the results?
Okay, while they're answering, probably they're typing. Okay, there is a question. Why did Nebraska and Maine decide to split their electoral votes?
Yeah, so that's something that I'll also talk about. I'll wait until after the answers to this question because it's very related. It's very relevant to this question.
Okay, Abby, there is a comment. Jamsahul. So I was told by one of American colleagues that the election system is out of date and does not really reflect the choice of everyone.
Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that when you look at this chart, you might think that. Of course, there are different opinions. I won't say if it's correct or not because teachers usually shouldn't say their opinion in the US. We should just give information. But what you can see in this chart is that the popular vote and the electoral vote can be completely different numbers. And there can be a big difference. So these two pie charts are very different. The popular vote shows that Obama got 53%, so he won the popular vote, but his electoral vote is 68%. So that's like a huge victory compared to a small victory in the first one. Somebody asked about Nebraska and Maine. So one thing that some states are doing, because the people in those states and in many states don't always like this system because it means the popular vote and the winner are not always the same. And people sometimes don't like this. They think it's outdated, like the person in chat said, or they think it's undemocratic. So these states decided they will give the amount of electoral votes in proportion to the popular vote. So if 2/3 of people voted for one candidate and 1/3 of people voted for the other, they will give, if they're a small state and have 3 electoral votes, they will give 2 electoral votes to one candidate and 1 to the other. But most states use winner take all, so they would give all the votes to whoever won the majority. Okay. We also have this idea of a swing state. They're called swing states or battleground states. So in our system, because it's determined by state, there are some states that have maybe a population with more mixed beliefs. So there are almost an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, or people who agree with those parties. So that means that every election year, we don't know which party they will vote for. It could be either one. So these states can change over time, but this is where most of the money and most of the campaign activities and most of the attention is focused. So whether it's about the election campaigns, focusing their resources, or about the news media, talking about their coverage, how they talk about the elections, these states have a lot of attention. For example, they're Florida, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Nevada. It can change over time, so we don't always have the same swing states, but there are some that are usually swing states, like Florida, Virginia, Pennsylvania. So the states that lean strongly towards Democrats are blue states, and they're considered safe. Democrats assume they will get these states so they don't have to spend a lot of money on advertisements there. They don't have to talk to voters as much or care about their issues necessarily, because they know they will win anyway. And then safe states that are red states is the opposite. The Republicans know they will win this state, so they don't try as hard in these states. They try hardest in the swing states. So it's something very important for media coverage and for the results. And so we already talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to ask your opinion if you think the system is effective. I'll ask you again in the Q&A, so you don't have to answer yet. But there are 5 times in our history that the person who won the popular vote did not win the election. So these show the votes, the results from the popular vote for those years. So it's not every year, but 5 times in history, the person who less people voted for became the president. So this is why, as the person in chat said, and as these states like Maine and Nebraska who split their electoral votes say this system is outdated and we shouldn't have it. So it's because of this reason primarily, but also because it can be confusing for people to understand sometimes. Okay, so now if you've written your answers, what do you think? Do you prefer a popular vote system or a system like the US, that is the Electoral College? Or why do you think that we do it this way? Are there benefits to it? What do you think? I'm going to...
Okay, there is a comment. I prefer more popular vote system. Popular vote system, 2 comments. I actually personally liked the Electoral College. It seems more, I don't know, interesting, I guess, to me. Okay, and talking about the previous slides, is it like something like when the election ends in draw, or it's not?
So I don't think the election has ever been a draw, like an equal number of votes. Since there are so many millions, it would be almost impossible. But a lot of times in these elections, so I'll show again, you can see that it's pretty close. Not always, but it can be really close. Like we see in 1876, one person had 50.9%. and the other person had 47.9. So this is very close. Or in 2016, our last election, there was 48.2% and 46.1%. So these are very close. So it's as close as we get to a draw. And usually it's like this. It won't be like 70% vote for someone and 30% vote for another, but we choose the one with 30%. That doesn't really happen. So it will always be really, we call them tight races. So tight or close, where it's almost half and half. But it does mean in this system, you don't need a majority of votes to win. You don't need more than half of people to vote for you. Sometimes less than half of people choose the president. And part of this is really intentional because one goal with the Electoral College and one goal with the way that the Senate and House are divided is to try to give some more power to states with a smaller population. So as I said, we spend a lot of time, resources, and attention on swing states in our system because they are really important to decide who wins. But if it was a popular vote, we would spend the time and attention and resources in states or cities with huge populations. So you would see a lot of campaigning in New York City, in Los Angeles, Chicago, these huge metropolises. But right now you don't see that. You see them spending most of their time in Florida, Pennsylvania, sometimes Iowa, Nevada. So these states might be ignored in the popular vote system. But in Electoral College, there are also a lot of states that are ignored. So you can't say one is completely better for everybody.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I didn't really know about this. Okay, so it seems like the majority liked the popular vote system. And also somebody said, thank you for explaining electoral votes. And also there is a comment that Electoral College is not effective. The Electoral College system was designed 2 centuries ago and was effective at that time. Time changes everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot has changed about our election system, even though this has not. So I can say that a lot of people in the US agree with these comments. Not everyone, but a lot of people. I think this system is outdated or confusing or not fair. So it's something that we talk about a lot. And before this presentation, I looked up information that said 700 times people have suggested we should change this system. But it hasn't changed because it's very complicated to change it, because it's in the Constitution. And to change our Constitution is a really complicated process that I won't explain it this time, but that's one of the reasons we still have this system from the beginning of our country that some people think is confusing.
Okay, and there was a comment, so why Abby can see the chat. So Abby can see the chat because she's sharing the screen and she can see only the video, I guess at the corner, yes, and only her presentation as well. And there was one more comment. I think sometimes it doesn't matter who will be the president in the US because there are long-going political projects in the US that will follow not only one president. Interesting.
That's also true. There are ongoing political projects, and there are also things that can be more important than the president. So we'll talk about that in our next topic. So I think I'll move on. If anyone has any specific questions, you can ask them in the chat now. I'll give you, let's say, 1 minute to write your questions, and then we'll move to the next topic.
I'm sorry, something was wrong with my internet. I thought that was yours. So I guess you can go on.
Okay, we'll move to the next topic. So someone also said it doesn't matter so much who the president is. In some ways, this is just because of the ongoing political projects you mentioned. But there are also some other things that people pay less attention to that I wanted to hopefully raise your interest a little bit. So what is on a ballot besides presidential candidates? So do you know what else we will see on our ballots?
Maybe I don't see any comments. Maybe you will. Okay. The answer from Alicia, senators, representative, local officials, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are more races than just president. So you mentioned senators, local officials, and that is true. So we have local officials who are also elected. And we also have more than just people on the ballot. So I'll explain that. So there are different levels of government because our system is called a federalist system. We have federalism. So it means there are different levels. So there's national or federal, which we have the president, but also some other ones that I'll show you. We also have the state level, and we have the local level, which includes counties and cities, and then smaller districts that the states will draw for themselves. So these are like local level, state level, and national level. So there are important federal races, which of course the president is one of them. And we have an election for the president every 4 years. But we have elections more often than this because there are also senatorial races and then races for the House of Representatives. And so these elections take place every 2 years, and every other one, there's a presidential election too. But we also have every 2 years really important elections that don't get as much attention because there's no president. So in the House of Representatives, members, the representatives are re-elected or they can change every 2 years. So they have a campaign every 2 years. Their term is 2 years long. So they have to almost constantly campaign and think about re-election. And so they can change more quickly if people are unhappy with them. And so they're kind of seen as a little closer to the people. And they're also not for the whole state, they'll be for districts. So a smaller group. And again, it can change quickly if people aren't happy. In the Senate, terms are for 6 years. So in every one of these 2-year elections, every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. So it's not every senator this year, but there are many senators who will have their election this year, 1/3 of them. And these are also very important races for what happens with politics, not only the president. So we call these races, not just these ones, but the local ones too, down ballot races or down ballot elections, because at the top of our ballot, we have the president. The presidential election is the first one we see. And then as you go down, it gets more local. So you'll have president, then senator, and it keeps going down. So a lot of Americans, and especially people abroad, because obviously it doesn't matter as much for each person abroad, but also in America, people don't pay attention to down ballot races as much as president. But they are very important, and you can understand a lot of what's happening in US politics if you understand these positions too. So if the House, Senate, and President all have a majority from the same party, so most of the House of Representatives are Democrats, and then the Senate is also mostly Democrats, and the president is a Democrat. This happens sometimes. It makes it really easy to accomplish many of the party's goals for at least 2 years. So for those 2 years before there's an election for the House and Senate, they can accomplish a lot of goals. And that's created policies like Obamacare that are popular with one party but not the other, because the other party can't do anything to stop them mostly. They can do a little bit, but not much. But if the House and Senate have a majority from different parties, so that's the situation right now in America, the House is a majority Democrat and the Senate is majority Republican, then it gives the opposition a voice. The opposition can do its own activities, and it can refuse to cooperate with things that are part of the other party's goal. So that creates a situation when compromise is possible or even necessary to do anything. So what's considered very important is like the budget, because it shows to what projects money will be given. So this budget requires compromise with both parties because the two houses of Congress are controlled by different parties, if that makes sense. But if the House and Senate have a majority from a different party than the president, so let's say both the House and the Senate have a majority that are Republican, but the president is a Democrat, it can be even more difficult to get things done. And so we have a term called gridlock, which is when it's difficult for any projects to get passed because Congress will give laws to the president that the president doesn't agree with. So he or she will just veto them. Veto means, to say no, basically. So it can be more difficult for a president or the president's party to accomplish their goals in this situation. So because of this, it really is very important to see not just who the president will be, but also who the senators and House of Representatives will be. And I can tell you that in this election, there's a lot of news about this. There usually is, but you might see a lot of news about the Senate races. Most people are pretty sure the House of Representatives will stay controlled by Democrats this time. But with the Senate, which is currently controlled by Republicans, so we have the second scenario where they're from two different parties. But we're not sure what the Senate will be after this election because there are several elections that are called toss-ups. It means anyone can win. We can't predict it. So there will be a lot of news about which party will take the Senate. And again, this will have big consequences for American politics. And then state and local elections are also very important. It's not as important for people abroad because these politicians don't deal with issues about foreign policy very much, almost zero. But it's very important for Americans, and it's something that I think is really important that I care a lot about. But a lot of Americans also don't pay as much attention for local elections. The presidential election is more interesting for most people. But each state manages the election differently. So election laws are mostly not made by the national government, but by state governments. They manage all the processes, how to register to vote, how to vote on election day, or if there's early voting, mail-in voting. All of this is different for each state. So I have voted in 3 states, and in one of the states, I voted in person. So I went on the day to fill in my ballot. In another state, they would send us mail-in ballots, but we also had the choice to go in person if we wanted to, if we prefer that. And then the last state I voted in, they only have mail-in. So there's no place you can go to vote in person. You can only get your ballot in the mail and then send it back or drop it in election boxes around the city. So it can make a big difference for the process of voting, the process of registering to vote. It depends on your state. And because of this, the type of elections you see can also be different in every state. So every state, not most states, every state has a governor race. And so you might have races like governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, which is like the top lawyer for the state, and state legislators. So just like the national government has a Congress, each state has like a mini Congress, and you vote for these people too. But then after these really typical elections, it can really change depending on your state and your city. In a lot of cities, you also vote for mayor. Not all cities have a mayor. In some cities, you'll be voting for city council. In some states, you can vote for judges. So in my state that I live in now, we vote for judges. The people choose them. And for the state Supreme Court and things like this, they run for election. But in another state I lived in, judges are appointed by higher officials, and we don't vote for them ever. So it can change a lot. And in some places you will vote for a county sheriff. So this is like the boss for a law enforcement agency. When I lived in Seattle, we would vote for who is in charge of the port authority. So if a city has a port, you might be able to vote for who manages this and what kinds of things they might do there. A lot of times you'll have a school board. This is most every state. So people have some voice for what is taught in schools, or what kinds of things happen in public schools. And then there are some races that aren't even people that you're choosing. They can be referendums, initiatives, propositions, changes to the state constitution, and approving or denying new taxes that the legislature would like to pass. So this, it's really interesting, but it gives voters a lot of work to do because they have to decide, well, they have to understand the issues in their community if they're going to choose things like this. So for example, you can have a new tax that they would like to pass. And a lot of people might say, of course, I don't want to pay more taxes, but it might be a tax that can only be used to repair a road in the city, a main road in the city. So a lot of people might say, actually, this is very important. So I will vote yes, I'll pay more taxes if it means this road will be repaired in my city. So it gives you a lot of control over things that affect your day-to-day life. So it's a lot of information. Your ballot, not only it's not just the president, it can be 3 pages long. My ballot this year is 3 pages long. So it's a lot of things people have to research. They have to know who they'll vote for every single race. They have to know their opinion about every initiative, every proposition. So for a lot of people, this actually stresses them out, and they will either not vote because they think there's too much information, or maybe they'll vote, but they'll only fill in the president and senator, and the rest they will just leave blank, which is okay. If you don't know every issue, then you can decide not to vote about every issue. But despite that, I think it's really important. And for me and my experience growing up as an American, I think it's really cool too. It gives people a lot of opportunity to participate in politics. So state and local elections usually have a bigger and more direct impact on everyday life. So this is how people directly decide issues about what subjects are taught in school, if they're voting for school board, what new roads and infrastructure can be built. So there can be projects about green energy or about new roads or public transportation, about housing, affordable housing being built by the state, or just private companies building luxury apartments only, and about social services. So more services for people with disabilities, or projects to make things more accessible. These things can either be on the ballot, or there can be local officials running who are really concerned about specifically these issues. So it gives you a lot more say about things that really affect your day-to-day life. And it also gives you an opportunity to be very close to the candidates or about the issue. Because there are issues that affect you and your neighbors, where sometimes the national politics or foreign policy seems far away from you. These affect your day-to-day life. And you have the opportunity to do things like go to town halls, probably not during COVID, but usually you can meet these candidates face to face and ask them questions and tell them if you disagree with them or you agree with them, or tell them your experience and what they haven't considered yet. You can do door knocking or canvassing, which I've been doing this year, which is usually, you can either do it on the phone, or you can go door to door and talk to voters and ask them things like, what issues are most important to you this year, and try to learn more information about what's important for a community, for local officials to focus on. You can volunteer in these campaigns. You can very easily write letters or call candidates and actually get a response. You can contact national representatives, but they have so much they don't usually respond. But with local candidates, you can do something like write a letter to the paper that's published for everybody, and the candidate might have to respond to that because people start asking that question. And with local races, you can also run yourself if you really care about something like public transportation or housing or disability rights or racial justice. You can run for a position yourself. So you have so much more opportunity as an individual person to make big differences in your community. So it's something that personally I'm really passionate about. And of course, these races don't get so much national coverage because why should someone in New York care about what happens in Iowa City? It doesn't affect them. So it's logical. We don't see as much in the media about it. But for American people, I think it's very important. And I wanted to ask you, I won't ask all of these questions because our time is running short. But what do you think, if you were an American, what kind of elections or issues would be most interesting for you? So we talked about federal level, the president, senators, congress people, and the House, or state or local things. What is most interesting for you?
Okay, while the participants are preparing to answer the questions, okay, I will read some questions from the chat. Is even an email what counties, so you don't need to go there in person?
You don't need to go there in person to vote?
Yes, to vote.
Yeah, so it depends on where you live. In some states, like Texas, for example, I read that if you want to do a mail vote, so you receive your ballot in the mail and send it in the mail, you have to give your election office a reason why you need to mail it. So some people might decide this because they live abroad. If you live in Kazakhstan and you're American, you can still vote, but you have to do it by mail. So maybe you're traveling or living somewhere else. Or maybe you have a disability and it's very difficult for you to get to the elections. Or you live 300 miles away from the closest election office. So for these cases, it's important to have an option for mail, but it depends where you live. And also this year, because of COVID, a lot of states are more flexible. So they're allowing more mail-in voting. And according to the news, a lot more people this year are voting by mail. So they don't have to gather all on election days in these polling places and potentially risk getting sick.
Okay, I see some answers. So the not answered federal election. Somebody also commented, as a student, I find school boards important. And okay, I guess there is some kind of personal question. Have you voted this year yet?
I did vote, so I voted early.
Okay, wait, I saw one question about email voting, I guess.
E-voting?
Yeah. Okay, is there a practice
Yeah,
of
so right now,
what? You can hear me? Can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I hear you.
Is there a practice of early voting? I mean, if someone cannot go, and can he or she vote 2-3 days before election day?
Yeah, so again, this depends on the state. And this year, it's a little bit different because of COVID. So there are more options this year, actually. But it depends on the state. In some states, you have only mail-in voting or going on the day of the election to vote. In some states, they have early voting, so you can go, usually starting maybe 2 weeks before the election, you can go and vote, which I think is great because it means the lines to vote are much shorter, and people can choose when is convenient for them. But not every state has this option.
Okay, and there is a question from Alisher. Could you please also explain the importance of Iowa caucus and where is caucus in general, and who is leading in the polls for the Senate in Montana?
For the Senate in Montana? Yeah. So at the very beginning of the presentation, I mentioned there are two kinds of elections. There are primary elections and general elections. So the Iowa caucus is really important in primary elections because the primary elections, they don't happen all at once like the general election. The states will vote, some starting in January, some states don't vote until May. But the first states to vote are the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire election for the primaries, because they're at different times. So because they're first, it's really Americans' first chance to see who is popular, at least in these states. But after they see who is popular in these states, sometimes that increases the candidate's popularity. So it has a really big influence on how the rest of the states vote. Some states just have a primary vote. So it's kind of like the general election. You go and vote for which candidate you like the best. And then they'll have the popular vote to decide which that state votes for. But some states have a caucus. So Iowa has a caucus. So what that means is it's kind of like the Electoral College where people go and vote, but there are people who volunteer their time to be in the caucus. So they do a lot of work deciding who will get the most votes. So it's kind of like a state level version of Electoral College. The thing that's interesting for a lot of people is that these volunteers can change their mind. So people might try to convince them why their candidate is better while they're participating in this event. So it's really different from just voting if you're participating in the caucus. And the other question was about the senator race in Montana. So in Montana, where I live, actually, it's one of a few Senate races that are very close. So right now, it's like 1% difference when you look at the polls, when you look at statistics of people's opinion. It's only 1 or 2% difference. So on election day, we will find out. For now, nobody knows who will win. And were there any other questions? I'll actually, I won't do my last topic, which is about voting rights, because we don't have very much time. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and then I can look at the chat myself. So that will be helpful. Okay. So I see from Jam, if election day is November 3rd, does it mean you should vote before this date? So again, this usually means you should vote on this date. But it depends on the state a little bit, because if you are mailing your ballot, you should mail it before November 3rd to make sure the election office gets it in time. So they might recommend, actually, you should send it by October 25th. A lot of states are recommending you shouldn't mail in any more ballots because it's too late. You should actually, if you haven't voted yet, you should go do it in person, or you should go to your election office and give your ballot to them instead of sending it in the mail. Results will be released after November 3rd because they're not announcing any results yet because many people haven't voted yet. A lot of people are voting early this time because of COVID especially, but it's still probably only half of people have voted. And on November 3rd, a lot more people will vote. And they have until usually 8 p.m. in their state. So then they just have to wait until all of these votes are counted. In the past, we would see results maybe at 3 a.m. It would be really late at night. But it might, especially because it's different this year, it might be a few days after the election when we'll really know. And they say Russians interfere with American elections. Do common American citizens think so, or it's just political gossip? I think that a lot of Americans read news about Russians using media or social media to maybe influence people's opinion. So sometimes they're concerned about this, yes. But again, it's a lot of it is media. Sometimes people are worried about hacking from foreigners, but not as much. It's usually about media. How can we get the results on the election night? So usually you can get results on election night. For us, it might be 3 a.m. In Kazakhstan, it will be more like 3 p.m., so in the middle of the day. But again, this year is a little different. It might take longer just because we've never had a situation like this year with COVID. So we're not really sure. And what impact do faithless electors have on the election? I'm not sure what you mean by faithless. If you mean people in the Electoral College, like those electors, if they're not following what voters want, that kind of thing doesn't really happen so much. If it did happen, people would be really upset. And Jasulan, do you have any experience in taking part in elections like volunteering? Yes, I do. And this year I've been volunteering in one local race. I won't say what it is because I won't say how I vote, but I do have experience with that. Is it legitimate for the president to nominate Supreme Court nominee on his final year of presidency? Well, that is a big question. I'm sure everybody, or at least Alisher, who asked this question, saw the news that that this happened yesterday or the day before yesterday. We got a new Supreme Court nominee. I think it's not illegal. So the question about legitimate is probably yes, it is in terms of legal, but there's a huge debate in the US with people who disagree with this. So I won't say my opinion, but it's something you can talk to Americans and they'll have strong opinions about this, about if it's wrong and bad or if it's fine and no problem.
Okay, please ask more questions. What's the definition of natural born residents to become the US president?
Mm-hmm. So there is a rule that you're talking about that the president, if you're eligible to run for president, you have to be born as a citizen of the United States. So it means either you have to be born in US borders in our territories and states, or your parents have to be US citizens. And that's true. It's one of the eligibility requirements for president. It's not true for any other office. So people who are immigrants who became US citizens can be in the Senate, in the House of Representatives and local officials, and there are immigrants in these positions, but it's a law that the US president can't be an immigrant. Are there any great changes in social support of US citizens compared to the Obama period? There are some changes. So one of the biggest issues that people talk about for this election, one of the biggest things that influence people's vote is healthcare. So a lot of people are discussing this a lot. So this was a huge change in the Obama period. Since then, with Trump, some of the laws about Obamacare have been changed. So it's changed the effect for people. And so they're very concerned about this, and it's a top issue. Write about my occupation. Or
Abby, sorry,
so
that was
I am a Fulbright.
Abby, sorry. That was my
Mhm.
question to the audience. I'm sorry for
Oh,
confusing
okay.
you.
Yeah. No problem. Where can we get reliable and unbiased information about the polls? Well, usually top media sources, when they're talking about the polls, they're talking about raw data. So it's usually not very biased. So every journalist has their own opinion, and you can't completely be unbiased. But about the polls, if you look at any main newspaper, even foreign ones like The Guardian, which is an English newspaper, they'll have very good information. Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, Al Jazeera, I'm sure. So these international newspapers or national newspapers on their websites on election day, they will have very accurate information. And someone asked, do I guess in this election, will we choose President Trump? I don't know, but also nobody knows. So usually every year with the president race, it's very close. And it's almost always a surprise for us on election night. So we never know who will win. And I also don't know. So we're all waiting to see. And how do states nominate their electors? So we vote, and our ballot will say, like this year, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, as well as smaller third parties that few people vote for. So we will vote for the president, but when the state gets those ballots, it will mean a vote for Donald Trump is a vote for Republican electors. A vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Democrat electors. So we're not voting directly for those candidates, we're voting for electors. So after the electors win, they choose which candidate will get the electoral votes. But as it stands in modern history, they always vote for who the people vote for. So if the majority of people vote for Donald Trump, he will get the electoral votes for that state. If the majority of people vote for Joe Biden, he will get the majority, or he will get all of electoral votes, except in a couple states where they will split them. Don't you think about taking part in promotion campaign in next elections? I'm not sure about next elections. Of course, it always depends on how much time I have. I think it's really important to be engaged in the process of elections as citizens. So some people donate their money, some people donate their time. This year I am donating my time. I'm participating as a volunteer, but I can't say for next year just because I don't know what will happen. But I think it's important to for Americans to pay attention, to read about the issues in their community, and to think seriously about their decisions. So I will definitely do that. Were there situations when electors voted for the opposite party? No, in recent history, that's never happened. It's possible that it's happened something like in the 1700s, but I'm not sure. Is it paid? So there are jobs with elections that you can get. So you can be paid and have a temporary job in an election campaign, or it can be your career. Your whole career can be election campaigns. It's not my career. I don't want to have a career in election campaigns, but some people do. But there are also temporary jobs with elections to be making phone calls or knocking on doors. But if people can't quit their jobs and do this, or if they're busy, they can maybe volunteer on the weekends to do similar tasks. And in that case, they wouldn't be paid probably. What would it take for Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico to become the 51st state? Really good question. So there is a process for new states, and it's happened pretty recently in our history. So Hawaii and Alaska only became states in the mid-20th century. And people are talking a lot about Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico. It depends a little bit about who will be in charge, because one party wants this to happen. The other party does not want this to happen. So we'll see. Can a foreigner in the US take part as a volunteer? That's a really good question. I think a foreigner in the US can do things like going to town halls and asking questions, and can be engaged in participating that way. But I don't know about election campaigns. There are a lot of rules for election campaigns, and they might decide this isn't so good.
Wow, so many questions, right? That's so cool that the audience is really interested in this topic. Okay, please ask more questions. And I have a question for you too. Okay, after I will share, sorry. How does
how does gerrymandering affect senatorial elections? So gerrymandering, which is another thing that I could spend a whole hour talking about probably. It's a complicated topic. It doesn't affect senatorial elections at all. So senatorial elections are by state. So the borders of states are drawn, and people who live in those states will vote for 2 senators. Not all at once, because they only come up for re-election every 6 years. but these positions aren't affected by gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is about elections that have districts inside the states. So we have state officials who make decisions about how these districts are drawn. So they'll draw a map with certain cities and they can split the city in half or only cover certain neighborhoods. And because sometimes where people live has a big influence on their political views, so we have neighborhoods that are mostly immigrants. We have neighborhoods that are mostly rich people. We have neighborhoods that are suburban or areas that are rural, like farms. So all of these different groups, racial groups, age demographics, being rural or urban or rich or poor, these influence people's political beliefs. So it's a very effective strategy to split areas where these people live so that they can't vote all together with one voice, but instead they're a smaller voice in a different district. So it does have a huge effect on state legislatures because those are by district. It has a huge effect on the House of Representatives because those are districts. So there's a huge effect of who has the power to draw districts in a state. And it's something a lot of people are always concerned about every year. But for the Senate races, it has zero effect because Senate is just the state and there's no one with the power to change the borders of that state or decide someone has to vote in another state. It can't happen. So for Senate, it doesn't have an effect.
Okay, just a reminder for the participants, you may turn your microphones on and ask questions by this, not just write into the chat.
Yeah, if you would prefer, you can ask your question with your voice. All men and women are created equal. There's a quote. Yeah.
Okay, I have some questions for you, just like general information, I guess. So how long does it take, for example, so the next president has already won, and how long does it take like for him to take the office?
So hopefully we will know who won the election a day after the election or a few days after the election. Hopefully we will know. But the new president or the continuing president would not take office until January 20th. It's usually like 19th or 20th. So in that week in January, there will be a ceremony to make them president again for the next 4 years, at the inauguration. And so if we have a new president, that's when his term would start. If we continue the same president, then there will be an official ceremony to recognize the next 4 years will be with him.
Okay, thank you for answering. Okay, please ask more questions because there are almost 5 minutes left until we'll close this session. Okay, our share has raised the hand. You may, okay, let me, okay. You may use your
Hello. Can I ask a question? First of all, yeah, I want to say thanks, Abby, for such a great presentation. And my question is, on which bills the Senate should vote, like more than 50%, or on which bills it should vote like 2/3 majority?
So on bills, like new laws,
Yes.
it's a simple majority is what we call it, which means just more than half of them. So that's a simple majority, is more than half. There are 100 senators. So if everyone participates, then it should be, 51 senators at least. But we have cases where you need a super majority, which is what you said, with 2/3 of the senators. That happens, it's necessary if you're changing the Constitution, because there's a process with this and it requires supermajority. It also happens if there's a situation where Congress passes a bill, but the president vetoes it. The president says no. But Congress really wants this bill to pass, and they have enough support. They can vote for it with a supermajority. So they have to do the vote again. If they have supermajority, then the president doesn't have the power anymore to say no. So after the president says no, they can still pass it if they have enough support. It's not very often. Usually things are simple majority. And there's another question in the chat. Do you feel a festive atmosphere after the elections? Some people feel a festive atmosphere if their candidate won, so they can have parties. There are some people who like to have watch parties. So in the past, like maybe some bars would have this theme, or people would have a party at their house with their friends to watch the results. I think this year it's not really safe to have these parties because of COVID. So most people won't do that. With festive atmosphere, it depends on the person, and it depends if their candidate wins. They might have a really sad day, or they might have a festive feeling. It depends.
Okay, thank you everyone for your questions. And thank you, Alusha, for turning your microphone on and ask personally. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for all the interesting questions and for your attention.
Okay, I guess it's already time, yeah. And so if there are no more questions, we'll probably close the session because it's already late, but not for Abby. Yeah, okay. Thank you everyone for participating in our session. Thank you, Abby, for your time. Thank you for this, I don't know, such a great presentation because you covered a lot of information. And there are so many interesting questions. Thank you again for our audience. And I guess, yeah, that's it for now. So guys, please don't forget to follow the news of American Corners Kazakhstan on social media. So we have a channel on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe on Instagram profiles and also Facebook pages. Yeah, thank you, Timur, my colleague from Pavlodar. He helped me during the session. Thank you, Abby, again for your time especially, and have a good day. And
yeah, thank you, Alifa, and thank you to everybody. Thank you for really good questions too.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye, stay healthy, take care.
Goodbye.